Citation 188 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams. This is the January 4th, 2007 entry. I went through the DPD homicide file today on Titus Jones Duffy and highlighted a couple of interesting things in the file, but nothing that jumped off the page at me that would possibly connect Ted to Duffy's murder or the OCCK case. This file we will assist in putting a better timeline together on Ted and also Duffy if need be, with arrests, addresses, victims, associates, etc. The house at 18th Street in Myrtle that Ted shared with Duffy in 76 to 77 is identified in this file as 3532 18th Street in Detroit. There are a couple of utility bills to Titus Jones at the 18th Street address in the file. Duffy's son is identified as Titus Michael Jones, a black male born April 20th, 1952, who lived at 1203 Euclid in Detroit with his mother Lily Jones, Duffy's wife or ex-wife. There was a young white male, approximately 13 to 14 years old, living with Titus Jones at the time of his murder, named Douglas Carver. Paperwork found in Titus Jones' wallet showed an agreement by Carver's parents to allow their boy Douglas to live with Jones. This agreement was typed and signed by both parents. Also mentioned as a possible suspect in Duffy's murder was a John Mish. This Mish subject was identified, interviewed, and polygraphed about the murder. Mish's polygraph was inconclusive. John Mish, Douglas Carver, Titus Jones Jr., Joseph McLeod, Robert Battle, Cornelius Bill Carter, and Joseph Alexander were all interviewed about the killing, and their statements are contained in the file. One thing for sure is that it appears that Duffy left his home with someone he knew the day he was killed. The manner of death indicates a crime of passion as opposed to something like robbery or a hit. Medical examiner's opinion on Duffy's death. Titus Jones died of multiple 14 stab wounds to the chest, abdomen, right side of the face, and neck. There are also multiple, at least 5 cuts to the throat and 5 blunt force injuries to the forehead. The cut wound on the right hand and fingernail mark on the left hand is suggestive of a struggle. The deceased had not been consuming alcoholic beverages prior to his death. Citation 189, the case notes of Detective Corey Williams, August 7th, 2007. Identified Josiah Tazalar's roommates at 1012 Seminole in Detroit today. I was looking through Gorzin's report today and saw that Josiah Tazalar had moved from 88 Stevens to 1012 Seminole in Detroit late in 1976 or early in 1977. I was attempting to identify associates of his to try and show a further connection between the Tazalars and Ted Lamborghini. We've already established a loose connection between the two, with Duffy, who was a roommate with Ted Lamborghini in the mid-70s and who would bring young boys from southwest Detroit to Tazalar's home in Highland Park for their pedophile parties. Tazalar had also admitted to investigators that in the spring of 2007 that he knew Lamborghini through Duffy, only after being cornered about this. How these pedophile parties were arranged, who attended, where they took place, and what occurred was described by redacted Tazalar's boy lover from Port Huron, this would be Mark Shuck, to Gorzin in his 1977 report. These same pedophile get-togethers to molest young boys was also described by redacted to investigators in 2007. I did a map quest of 1012 Seminole in Detroit and observed this residence to be approximately 3 blocks away from Louise Hodgson's house on Parker Street in Detroit. Both of these residences are located east of the Belle Isle Bridge off Jefferson. In Gorzin's 1977 report regarding Josiah Tazalar, the house on Seminole was described as being an apartment-type house that was rented by pedophile men. I ran a check through LexisNexis for people associated to the Seminole address and observed Richard George Tamo, white male born redacted 1927, to be the owner of the residence for many years. Tarno's name was on the list of pedophiles associated with Tazalar, Schultz, Sheldon, Miller, etc. that was put together by MSP and that task force back in 77 of pedophiles connected to these subjects in the Highland Park area. There were 2 other subjects associated to the Seminole address that were possibly other pedophile men that rented rooms from Tarno, along with Tazalar. One was a subject identified as William G.I. Anderson, possibly Bill, that redacted described, white male born January 1924, now deceased. The second subject was a John Frederick Tascott, possibly Fred the photographer, described by Redacted and Redacted, although he does not show any ties to the Chicago area. White male born January of 1936, now deceased. During early interviews I conducted with Richard Lawson back in 2005, he described a couple of pedophile men that lived off Jefferson near the Belle Isle Bridge that were into both young boy and young girls. Lawson told me that one of the subjects ran a pool hall in the area, was an ex-Marine, and was violent. Lawson stated further that these pedophiles were capable of committing crimes like the OCCK, and were known by Lawson to molest kids in a trailer that was behind this house. In 2005, I was unable to locate these subjects. All this information was relayed to John Owlett from the FBI. Citation 190, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 13th, 2007. Interviewed Willem Bill Taslar today, Josiah's brother. Today I went to redacted 12 Mile Road in Southfield, Michigan, and interviewed Josiah Taslar's brother, Bill. Bill's an architect and owner of Taslar Associates Architects, which is situated in Suite 103 at the above-mentioned address. Bill was the only person in the small office when I interviewed him. I identified myself and asked him if he had spoken with his brother recently, to which he stated that they speak all the time. Bill further stated that he and Josiah are good friends and have become closer over the years. I asked Bill if Josiah told him that we came to see him recently, to which he stated that Josiah had not. I asked Bill if he knew why we had contacted and talked to his brother. Bill stated it must be about the kids. I asked him what kids he was referring to, which he said kids that he has molested, referring to his brother's pedophilia. I explained that I was a member of a task force investigating the Oakland County child killings from the 1970s, and that his brother's name came up in this investigation, and that I would like to talk to him about his brother. Bill said that he would answer any questions he could. Bill said that his family came to the United States in the 1940s from the Netherlands. I asked Bill when he and his wife Ruth first arrived in the Detroit area from the Muskegon, Grand Rapids area, to which he said that he and his wife lived in Troy, Michigan from 1969 to 1971 when he first started working as an architect in this area. Bill said that in 1972 they bought the house on Windermere in Birmingham that they currently live in. I asked Bill what year Josiah came to the Detroit area from Muskegon, and did he live with him and Ruth. Bill told me that Josiah first came to the area in approximately 73 to 74 and lived with them for 1.5 to 2 years on Windermere. Bill said that in approximately 1975 to 76, Josiah got an apartment on Stevens Street in Highland Park and moved down there. I asked Bill if after Josiah moved, he would come and visit. Bill said that Josiah would come to his house about once every week or two to visit, eat, and occasionally spend the night. I asked Bill if Josiah would go for walks when he lived in Windermere or when he would come to visit. Bill said that Josiah would walk, stating that he and his wife walked too. I asked about walking to the park, to which Bill said I don't know where he walked to or know if he specifically went to the park, but we would walk by it. I asked Bill if he remembers the Oakland County child killings in 1976 to 1977 in this area, stating that it was all over the news. Bill said he does not remember hearing about that, stating further that he doesn't watch the news all the time. I asked him if he remembers a little boy named Timothy King that was abducted from the drugstore down the street and lived with his family a few blocks from here in this neighborhood. Bill said that he doesn't remember anything like that. I asked Bill if Josiah ever brought any of his friends out to the house, to which he stated no. Citation 191, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, January 4th, 2007. Info from Redacted. She names Carl Schoenbeck. I received a packet of information today from Detective Tim Larlin that contained info from a woman named Redacted from Warren, Michigan, about a possible lead in the OCCK case. She talked in her letter about some adult male pedophiles that operated in her old neighborhood on the east side of Detroit in 1976 to 1977. She talked about how in December of 76, she was almost abducted by a white male subject with dark hair, driving a small green car. She went on to say that the subject in the car looked a lot like Bob Moore or Carl Schoenbeck. I called John Owlett from the FBI and Gary Gray from the MSP and told them that this woman named Carl Schoenbeck in her information. John Owlett from the FBI had just in the past few weeks identified Carl Schoenbeck as being the older brother of Ralph Schoenbeck, the young white male prostitute that Lawson talked about in the 6 Mile and Woodward area in 1976 to 77. Lawson had told me during an interview I conducted with him in May of 2005 that if I could find Ralph, he might have information about who the Oakland County child killer is. Ralph was identified through information supplied to Detective Gorzen in 1977 by Josiah Tazzlar. Tazzlar lived in the 6 Mile and Woodward at 88 Stevens area at that time. Tazzlar supplied this information about Ralph to Detective Gorzen back in 1976 to 77. Tazzlar confirmed Lawson's information about the young prostitute Ralph operating in that area at that time, stating that his name was Ralph Schoenbeck. Tazzlar also stated that a Michael Larimer had plans on taking Ralph from 6 and Woodward to New York to prostitute him, but that Tazzlar stopped him by going to Ralph's school and warning them of Larimer's plans. John Owlett talked to Ralph Schoenbeck's ex-wife, who told Owlett that Ralph killed himself years ago, his body cremated and buried next to his mother in a cemetery in downtown Rochester. It does not say in the letter from Redacted how she got Schoenbeck's name exactly, and if she had known him from her neighborhood back in the day. I tried calling her, Redacted, and it has since been disconnected. John and I will try to go interview her at her home next week. I ran Carl Schoenbeck through the OTIS system and for a CCH, and located Carl Ernest Schoenbeck, white male, redacted, 1947. Schoenbeck is currently in prison near Muskegon, Michigan for CSC 1, for a child under 13, and has a lengthy CCH. I ran a check through the Wayne County Register of Deeds for Carl Schoenbeck, which showed his name on a deed in the city of Detroit in 1992. Also on this deed were Stanley Thompson, William Bufford, Allen's Excavating, and Carl Schoenbeck. This is something else for Citation 191. This is case notes again of Detective Corey Williams from February 15th, 2007. This morning, I ran a criminal history check on Kent David Schultz and observed an arrest by the Wayne County Task Force in October of 1977 for child molestation. This matches what Richard Lawson and retired Detroit Police Department Chief Isaiah McKinnon told me about David Schultz. I ran a check on Kent Gilbert Schultz through the OTIS system and observed him to be currently in Jackson Prison for child molestation. He was sentenced in 1985 to 20 to 40 years for 2 counts of CSC 1, which is child under the age of 13. Today, Gary Gray and I met with the King family at their home in Birmingham. This is Timothy King's family. The purpose of this meeting was to update the family on the direction this lead is taking, and the latest information involving Josiah Tazzlar, who used to reside in their neighborhood in the mid-1970s. We also showed pictures to the family of Tazzlar, Moore, and Lawson, Lamborghini, and others associated with this lead. Neither the names nor faces were familiar to the Kings. After the meeting, I was reading some of the Schultz files from 1977 and observed that Kent Gilbert Schultz did in fact live behind the Methodist Church at Woodward Avenue and Church Street and was the caretaker of the church. This file also showed that Kent Schultz worked at a hospital. All this information matches what Lawson told us about David Schultz. An extensive investigation into Schultz was conducted by the task force in 1977. Eventually, Schultz was interviewed, polygraphed, which he passed, and was cleared of involvement in the OCCK case. I identified Ralph the Catch tonight as Ralph Redacted. I was reading the Schultz file at home tonight and observed the task force in 1977 interviewed a 14-year-old boy named Ralph Redacted, white male, born Redacted, 1963. Redacted resided at the time at Redacted, Wanda, Detroit, Michigan. During the interview, Redacted said that he has been a prostitute in the area since he was 9 years old. He also said that he has been Kent Schultz's boy lover for 2 years. This is probably the boy named Ralph that introduced him to Schultz. Citation 192, case notes of Corey Williams, June 2nd, 2005. So jumping around the place a little bit as far as the time in question is concerned. I interviewed Isaiah Ike McKinnon today, the ex-chief of police in Detroit, about Richard Lawson. Lawson had stated during earlier interviews that he had worked as an informant for Ike during the original OCCK investigation. Chief McKinnon told me that he was in charge of the Detroit Police Sex Crimes Unit at the time, and they were working on the child killing case. I was expecting Ike to say that Richard is not a credible person, don't believe anything he says, but McKinnon had the opposite to say about it. He said that Richard is a full-blown pedophile, was an excellent snitch, and helped his crew arrest over 20 pedophiles, working the Woodward and 6 Mile area at the time of the OCCK investigation, in an attempt to locate the child killer. Ike said that Richard is long-winded, but that if I can get him to open up about his pedophilia and past criminal activity, that Lawson would be a wealth of information and may help close unsolved crimes, including murders. The chief went on to say that they used Lawson to teach officers about pedophiles and pedophilia, and that Lawson went on the news in the 1970s to give his opinion about the child killer. I asked Ike if he or anyone in his crew would have shown Lawson, or if Lawson would have had access to any photographs of the dead kids from the investigation, to which McKinnon stated absolutely not. Ike said that Richard was well connected in the pedophile network in several states and led his crew to a raid in Detroit that yielded files of thousands of pedophiles' names around the country. I asked McKinnon, knowing everything he now knows about Richard Lawson, would he put it past Lawson to have been involved in the Oakland County child killings, to which he stated, absolutely not. McKinnon reiterated that if I can get Lawson talking, he would be a wealth of information, stating that Lawson was connected to and kept files on pedophiles in not only Detroit, but also places like Chicago, Indianapolis, New York, etc. I asked McKinnon about the David Schultz arrest, to which he said that when his crew arrested Schultz, they thought he was going to be the Oakland County child killer. McKinnon said that Lawson was the informant on the Schultz case. Schultz was cleared in the OCCK case. This is from page 86 of Eye of the Chickenhawk. Other charges possible, from the Times-Herald, October 29th, 1977. Highland Park. A social worker charged with sexually assaulting a 12-year-old boy may face similar charges involving as many as 6 other youths, authorities say. Police said they also plan to question Kent Schultz, 32, again in connection with the sex slayings of 4 Oakland County children last winter. Detectives have said they followed up all sex offenses in the area for possible links to those cases. Schultz was scheduled for arraignment last Friday in district court. Lieutenant Robert Robertson, a member of the Oakland County Task Force investigating the killings, said Schultz was questioned earlier this year, but was released after his work records gave him an alibi. Schultz was arrested Thursday after the 12-year-old boy told police Schultz had sexual relations with him about a dozen times since June 1st. Citation 193, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, September 15th, 2006. Interview of Redacted on the phone. He talks about Richard Lawson molesting him when he was 8 years old. I conducted a follow-up interview on the phone today with Redacted. I was trying to get the last name of Frank, a Middle Eastern male that lived with Lou Fix in the Cass Corridor in the 1970s. During earlier interviews with Redacted, he told me that Lou Fix had a homosexual roommate named Frank, stating that they were both into young boys and producing pornographic movies of boys. Redacted told me that Lou Fix and Frank owned the apartment building or house together that they lived in on Canfield in Detroit, and that I could probably get Frank's last name from the Wayne County Register of Deeds office. While talking to Redacted, he told me that he remembered who molested him when he was approximately 8 years old. Redacted told me that it was Richard Lawson, and that he just recently remembered this. During an interview in early 2006, Redacted had told me that he had been molested as a child, but didn't remember who it was. Redacted went on to say that the sexual assault by Lawson took place by the pool table in the basement of the Cass Methodist Church in the Cass Corridor of Detroit. This independently corroborates information from Paul Redacted about a sexual assault committed against him by Richard Lawson at Cass Methodist Church. Redacted was adopted and raised at Cass Methodist Church by the senior pastor, Lewis Redmond, who currently lives in San Diego, California. Cass Methodist Church is where Lawson, Schuler, and Tippett were big brothers to the boys in the Big Brother program at the church. The Big Brother program at Cass Methodist Church was run by two pastors at the church, Lewis Redmond and Felix Lorenz. I asked Redacted if I could come interview him further about this. He stated he wants to think about it, and he would call me. This is something else for Citation 193. Case notes of Corey Williams again from August 29th, 2005. I also received the military records on Schuler and Lamborghini today from the National Archives. Along with this packet was the U.S. Customs file on Robert Schuler. These files confirmed both their military service and Schuler's U.S. Customs employment at the Ambassador Bridge in Detroit in the late 70s. Lamborghini's Navy record confirmed his statement from his interview that he was kicked out of the Navy for homosexual activity. Schuler's customs file showed a letter from a grateful parent of a young boy that was in the Detroit bus terminal from Ontario and was going to have to spend a day or two in Detroit, and Bob Schuler was kind enough to look after the young man. The parents of this boy sent a letter to U.S. Customs commending Schuler. Citation 194 is the case notes of Detective Corey Williams, September 15, 2006. This particular section we covered just a few citations ago, but it's relevant again for where we are right now in the story. And that's just particularly to say that this Big Brother program at Cass Methodist Church was run by two pastors at the church, and those were Lewis Redmond and Felix Lorenz. Something else for Citation 194 is case notes again. This is September 13th, 2006. Gary and I interviewed Robert Redacted at Detroit Receiving Hospital this afternoon in connection to admissions Ted Lamborghini made to Parma Heights detectives about sexually molesting Roberts, Redacted, in Detroit back in the 1970s. Ted had told the Parma Heights detectives during a tape-recorded interview that he had sexually molested Michael Redacted back in Detroit in the 70s when the victims were boys. Robert was at the hospital when his brother Ronald, who we had interviewed back in June and agreed to cooperate with this investigation, telling detectives that Ted Lamborghini had sexually molested him many times when he was approximately 13 years old. Robert was not cooperative with detectives about being molested in the past by Lamborghini. See narrative report of this interview for details. This evening, Gary and I went to Redacted, Calvin, and Dearborn and conducted a tape-recorded interview of Redacted. I had interviewed Redacted in April of 2005 in connection to his involvement with Richard Lawson in Detroit back in the mid-1970s. During this interview, Redacted stated that he knew Richard Lawson and Faye Redacted back then and spent a lot of time with them. Coleman told me that he was introduced to Richard Lawson, Jim Tippett, and Bob Schuler as big brothers by Pastor Felix Lorenz at the Cass Methodist Church in Detroit when Redacted was approximately 10 to 11 years old. Redacted told me that he would ride with Richard in his Detroit Free Press van, and that Richard would take him to his house in Detroit. During the interview today, Redacted told detectives that Richard Lawson sexually molested him by performing oral sex on him approximately 4 times over a 6-month period in the summer of 1976 when Redacted was 11 years old. Redacted told detectives that 3 of these incidents took place at Richard's parents' house on the east side of Detroit in the 6 Mile Road in Van Dyke area. Coleman said that the 4th incident took place at the Cass Methodist Church in Detroit, where Richard Lawson molested him on the pool table in the church. See narrative report and Coleman file for details of interviews. Also see MSB transcripts from tape recording of this interview for details.